Well, let me, I just want to say a couple of things, and then I'd love to take some questions. This has been a most disturbing weekend, but I want to thank everybody here who was showing the true face of who Virginia is and who this country is by welcoming people to Dulles in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We are a welcoming state, not a hard-hearted state. We are an open state, not a state with a closed fist, and the folks who are here are demonstrating that. I just went over and visited with the lawyers who have been here all weekend helping folks, and I want to just tell you a story. I told some of the lawyers this. I'll tell you a story, and then I'm going to talk about these orders. The story is this. I was on Meet the Press yesterday talking about how ill-considered these actions were, and after Meet the Press, I went to Roanoke. I had previously scheduled a trip to go to Roanoke to do events connected with the Affordable Care Act. At an event in Blacksburg last night, again, I'm there for another reason, but in Blacksburg, Virginia, a family comes up to me and they talk to me about the fact that with Catholic Charities, they had helped a Syrian refugee family, 2 adults and 4 kids, come to the New River Valley a year ago. And they told me about this family, how wonderfully they've fit in, how the father, they've helped him with English lessons and then gotten him a construction job, how the construction crew has some tough customers on it, but how they've grown to love this refugee because he's such a fantastic member of the company. And members of this construction crew have put their resources together to buy soccer shoes for the kids. A welcoming attitude toward refugees in Blacksburg, Virginia. That was last night. This morning I opened up the Roanoke newspaper before going doing 2 visits about the Affordable Care Act with the largest healthcare system and a large college training healthcare professionals. Lead article, Roanoke Times. Virginia Tech has 100 people that are part of the tech community, students, researchers, administrators who are caught up in this order, people who are getting degrees and have loved ones abroad who now can't come back. And this is viewed by one of our premier educational institutions as a significant danger to their community life. And then when I sat down with the hospital system and the Jefferson College of Medicine, they wanted to talk to me about the Affordable Care Act. They wanted to talk to me about healthcare, but part of healthcare is the workforce. And they talked about their workforce, how much of their workforce is immigrants who are threatened by what's going on, how much anxiety it creates in trying to deliver healthcare to people, that wonderful and compassionate healthcare professionals, because of the countries they come from, are now in jeopardy or in doubt about their situation. So again, I'm in Roanoke, Virginia, not Dulles, not LaGuardia, not one of the major airports, but whether it's about healthcare or the university or compassionate work being done by Catholic Charities and individuals who just want to show this welcoming face of Virginia, this executive order is an outrage to them, and it should be an outrage to all of us. There's so many things wrong with this order. I'm going to start with it was sprung with very, very little thought about consequence. The reports coming out suggest that it was drafted up by political hacks in the White House with very little effort to share it with professionals who understand our immigration system, who understand our border issues. The report suggests that when it was shared with the Department of Homeland Security, and the department suggested this should not apply to green card holders, people who have already been vetted and provided a status saying that they are permanent legal residents of this country, it should not apply to it. White House political figures overruled our Homeland Security professionals to say, no, it applies to green card holders too. This is an outrage. Do you know how many millions of Americans are working and living overseas because they're with family or they have jobs overseas, and they essentially have the foreign equivalent of a green card to live and work and pay taxes and be treated well in those countries abroad? Do we want to subject them to harassment and ill treatment by other governments by treating permanent resident aliens in this country to ill treatment? That was the first thing about it that was horrible, that the White House overruled security professionals and immigration professionals who said it should not apply to green card holders. Second, this is applied to turn away from our country people who are coming here on special immigrant visas. Senator Shaheen, McCain, and I have been very active as members of the Armed Services Committee in making sure that those who have worked with our troops, I got a kid in the military, people overseas on the field of battle who work with our troops should be able to do that and know if they help us, they will be protected. not that they will be abandoned. And that's what this is. When somebody gets this special immigrant visa status, they get it because their work with Americans puts their lives at risk. And at least a few special immigrant visas, we don't yet know the numbers, people coming in have been turned away and sent home possibly to face danger for the simple reason that they were willing to help American troops on the field of battle. That is absolutely shameful. Third, the ban on refugees perpetuates a picture of who these people are that is entirely false. Of the 16,000 Syrian refugees who were admitted into the United States last year under the refugee program, 73% are women and children under the ages of 14, just like the family that Blacksburg has embraced that they described to me last night. When they described this to me last night about the refugees, they had another question for me. We have another family coming to Roanoke that's scheduled to get here this Thursday, a mom and dad and 4 other children. This first family's resettlement has worked so well that we've worked with Catholic Charities, and we have another family now coming in. What's going to happen to them? Are they going to be allowed in? The family that is supposed to arrive in Roanoke this week, they fled Syria because of the atrocities and war crimes in April of 2013. They've been in a refugee camp supervised by the United Nations for nearly 4 years, being vetted for 4 years, first by the UN, then by the United States, and now they thought, finally, at the end of 4 years, they would be allowed to come to a community that wants them and a community that is welcoming them, this community in Southwest Virginia, only to now find that their arrival here may be in jeopardy because of this order. So the pictures of refugees that this order paints as if they're dangerous people, these are victims of the worst humanitarian crime, the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. And when is our nation, when we've been at our best, turned a hard heart to victims of atrocities rather than try to do what we can safely to welcome them in? That's the third part of this problem. And the fourth one is this. This is a religious test, pure and simple. Singling out these countries that are Muslim majority countries and then saying an exception would be created for people coming from these countries if they're parts of religious minorities. President Trump specifically said Christians. This is a religious test of exactly the kind that President Trump said he would do when he was a candidate. I understand that Rudy Giuliani says, well, he's doing it this way because I told him this is the legal way to do a Muslim ban. There is no legal way. There is no moral way. There is no way that is in connection with Virginia values or American values to do a Muslim ban. It was Thomas Jefferson in 1780 who authored the Statute of Religious Freedom in Virginia. It was in Virginia's statute before it was in the First Amendment. We do not prefer or punish people in this country because of how they worship or whether or not they choose to worship. We don't. We don't. That was Thomas Jefferson. And when James Madison was drafting the Bill of Rights, he originally didn't think we needed a Bill of Rights. But then he saw Baptist ministers being persecuted in Orange and Culpeper counties by the Church of England, and he said, we need a Bill of Rights to protect people's ability to worship as they please. This is a Virginia value like no other, and it's in the First Amendment to the Constitution for a reason. But what Donald Trump has done with this order is contravene that deep Virginia value and put people on a different plane because of how they worship. And the fact that that was done last Friday on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, at the same time as the White House was taking out of the annual proclamation any reference to the fact that the Holocaust was about Jews, this is not a coincidence. This is not an accident. These things are connected, and we've got to stand strong for the First Amendment value. Stand strong for the First Amendment value that people are entitled to religion, and we are as a nation that respects everybody's choice of how to worship or even whether they choose not to worship. So last thing I'll say this, and I'll answer questions. We need to stand against this in the courts, thanks to the lawyers, thanks to some of these court rulings. We've got to stand against it in Congress. My colleagues and I are doing a vigil on the steps of the Supreme Court later today, and we are contemplating, we've written a number of letters, but we're now looking at what legislation we put in to retract it at the same time as we're fighting in courts. And I could not be prouder of the number of Americans like these friends in Blacksburg and Roanoke and the folks here who were saying, no, we're going to turn out to this airport because we want to show people getting off these planes that we are a welcoming people, not a hard-hearted people. Last thing, I had a conversation today with officials from the CBP to ask them a series of questions. Here are answers to questions that I've asked, and in the coming days we will have more questions. First, with respect to green card holders, they finally have gotten their act together and come up with a policy. I'm not saying I liked a policy, but they finally gotten their act together and come up with a policy. Here is the policy. It's a little complicated. The executive order applies to green card holders, but green card holders will be allowed to board planes in other countries and come here. They will then be subject to questioning depending upon the discretion of CBP officials, and the expectation is then that they will be waived and allowed to enter. That is the policy with respect to green card holders that they finalized as of yesterday. Others will be blocked from boarding planes where they're trying to come to the United States. Green card holders can board, will have to answer questions, are subject to the order, but then are expected to be waived. The same policy now applies to special immigrant visa holders. They can board, they're subject to the order, they will be questioned, but they are expected to be waived and allowed in. As for families, like the refugee family that was prepared after 4 years of working through a tough vetting process to allow to arrive in Roanoke and be welcomed there by a community that wants them there, their status is very, very much in jeopardy. I have information about the family, and I'm going to follow up to see what we might be able to do. I thank my staff, many of whom are here, who have been working very hard over the weekend to help people figure out what this means. And with that, I'm glad to open it up and take a question or two.
Could you respond to the comparisons being made to what President Obama did in 2011? Did you support that? And just help people understand if there is a difference, where you see that?
President Obama did not demonize anybody in 2011. President Obama, as far as I know, never stopped green card holders from coming into this country. President Obama, as far as I know, never stopped special immigrant visa holders from coming into this country. And President Obama has never done anything that treated Muslims in an inferior way. Nothing that would have suggested a religious test of the kind that President Trump is doing. So I think an attempt to kind of slough this off, oh, this is just like what was done, I don't think that passes the straight face test. That's a great question. We are looking for hope, and we're placing our hope in a lot of people. I place my hope in these lawyers and the courts. I place my hope in my colleagues. I place my hope in these citizens. We all have to be active and engaged to rise up and speak about the improper nature of how this was done. And will it be a court battle or a legislative battle or a popular outcry that will slow this down and stop it? I'm not going to predict which one, but if we all do our part, we have a much greater likelihood of success.
President Trump said that catching terrorists is messy. He said something to that effect. What would you say to the people who say, well, we're just trying to catch terrorists?
He's right, but there's a right way to do this. If you are worried about the security bona fides of people coming into the country, then you examine everybody's bona fides the same way. But you don't single people out based on where the country that they are coming from. You don't single people out based on their religion. You make it about security. Vice President Pence, along with others, when they were governors, they put in place bars on Syrian refugees based on the country of origin. The Seventh Circuit in Chicago struck down the Indiana law. They said there's a right way to focus on security and a wrong way. You don't single people out based on their country. You instead explore what you can about who they are, and if you can answer your questions with satisfaction, they come in. If you can't, you don't. But you don't single people out based on illegitimate criteria.
Lawyers here say that despite the judge's order on Saturday, they've been shut out, had no access with anyone here, and they've not been able to get any information. What does Customs say?
That is, the lawyers said the same thing to me. They said the same thing to me. CBP told me that as of yesterday morning, there has been no one detained here at Dulles. And this was a conversation that took place at about maybe at about 1 o'clock this afternoon, that no one has been detained here since yesterday morning, and they did not expect anyone would be. That doesn't mean that no one was questioned, but that means that there's no one being detained right now. That is what they have told me, and we are going to do our own work to verify that, but since yesterday morning, no one has been detained here.
All right, thanks everyone. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
All right, everybody. Well, that was Tim Kaine speaking live at Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. in response to all of these protests that have been happening since President Trump signed that executive order to ban